Thank you all for coming on this Friday. Chad, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have this conversation. Our own Tim Pearson, I'm sure he talks to you quite a bit. I hope he does, because this is a big issue. You know, as we're in this period of transition, it's pretty hard to produce stuff. Um, but just to set the table, Chad, give us a little background about the studio business of Vox.
Yeah, so I am I guess you could call it like a Vox lifer at this point, and I joined the company in 2010, right as we were rebranding as Vox Media Inc. The company, as you can see on the screen, was founded 2005 as SB Nation, going as Sports Blogs Inc. And when I joined, we were just founding The Verge. I was on the Verge kind of founding team, running the digital video business and the studio for the Verge team and the SB Nation team, and a lot of our kind of DNA that informs our Hollywood studio business, kind of grew out of like that very sort of digital native, making content for the web. And we've been able to like apply a lot of that scrappiness that we've learned from just sort of being in our DNA as sort of lifelong digital producers to how we produce television writ large, but particularly like during a pandemic where we've had to quickly adjust our way of making things. And as a company, we've always had like a very strong remote culture because, I'm not sure how many of our viewers know, like SB Nation was based in DC, and The Verge, when we launched it, was based in New York. And so we, even from the very beginning with 35 employees, it was balancing a culture across, two cities. And so that kind of remote culture at the beginning has informed a lot of how we've been able to adapt to a fully remote production model and as a company in general. So, the studio started, I was running essentially like digital programming, was creative director of Vox Media for the first 5 years of our existence, first 4 years of existence. In 2015, I moved out to Los Angeles to kind of establish a beachhead for us in Hollywood. And our goal, we had a ton of infrastructure for making digital video, and we had a bunch of really talented creators, and we felt like we really wanted to like apply the Vox Media ethos of modern storytelling to television. We thought, as the rise of streaming services started to really accelerate, it felt like we had a real opportunity. And I think the moment in time for us, we noticed, was the first time that ESPN announced that they had subscriber decline for the first time ever. It was like, this is the cable business is shifting finally in this direction. And I think that like, at the beginning of Vox Media, we really wanted to build like a company that could have a seat at the table for the future of the publishing industry as publishing went digital. And it always felt like
explain a little bit the opportunity, and then I want to get into the now. But I was always wondering, it's like, what's the opportunity? There's tons of studios out there, and they're, this is what they do. They're very good at it, right? So like, what's the opportunity for a Vox in this area? What's the sort of white space, as they say?
I mean, the white space is there's always, there's always demand for great shows and great content. We've always had ambitions to, be a full 360-degree media company, and that includes, digital publishing, digital content, and for us, television. And, we always wanted to have a seat at the table for the future of TV, just like we wanted to have a seat at the table for the future of the publishing biz. And, we felt like we had important stories to tell, and we set up this studio to try and tell them. And there are lots of studios out there, and there's also lots of different business models in Hollywood. And we found one that really works for us, that lets us sort of take advantage of a bunch of great IP that we have, and a lot of the infrastructure and know-how that we had already built. And we've seen a big real business grow, and certainly our success has been has been a result of just jumping in fully. And, I think the question is sort of why would what started as a digital publisher, now just a modern media company, get into Hollywood? It was like, we felt like the demand for modern television programming was shifting a lot as, sort of the
Hmm.
viewers move towards streaming services, and we felt like there was, every month almost, it felt like there was another distributor out there, whether it was Netflix or Amazon, Hulu,
And
Disney.
they're paying
They're
money,
paying real money, yeah, exactly. And there's
not like pile up a bunch of views that maybe were views, maybe not. We might go back and say, oh, we didn't count those right, and maybe the money will come later, or maybe it won't. I don't know. Maybe they'll mid roll. Maybe there won't be.
right. Yeah. I mean, there's a real business model. I mean, there's the reality is like there is a very real business model in production, and it is a stable, business. There's nothing like that we're doing that is any different from what other studios do. We develop, sell, produce, package, and, make the shows that we deliver to networks.
Mhm.
And there's a well-established business model about how companies that can do that can make money.
So
And
you're taking your IP. We're looking at the Eater's Guide to the World. Excuse me. You're taking the IP that you're developing, in these brands and the franchises, with the different brands under Vox's umbrella, and you're translating these, and you're cutting deals with distributors to pay you money.
yes, very well put.
That's what
Not
that's my
just
pitch.
it's not just our IP as well. I think, we're starting from a place where we have a bunch of great assets and a bunch of great IP, and Eater is a great example of that, but also now New York Magazine, Epic, Vox. But we also, one of the things I think that sets us apart from some of the other publishers that have studio businesses or who have, made inroads in Hollywood is we are a full service production company. So Vox Media Studios exists within Vox Media, but we are a full service production company, kind of soup to nuts. And what that means in a real practical term is that we are not only the, in some cases, the licensor of IP or the owner of the IP that gets, developed into a show and sold. We are the actual physical producer of that show. And we are the production company of record, which means that like there is no, we don't need to partner to get our shows produced, to sell a show to Netflix, to sell a show to Hulu. Sometimes we partner because it makes sense to, to build a package to develop and sell a great piece of, a great show. But we are, we do all of the post-production ourselves. We do all the production accounting, the finance, the legal, the BA. We put together the deals. And when when a network hands us, the budget to make a show, we're responsible for spending every one of those dollars and managing that production. And that is something that I think sets us apart. That is very different from a lot of other publishers.
But does that put you in a different competitive? Like, do you compete with like a Radical in that sort of?
Yeah, actually. So when you look at our competition, obviously Vox Media competes in the broader media company landscape, and our advertising business, competes there. For us, I look at companies like Radical, Anonymous, is like Boardwalk, which produces Chef's Table and the Goop Lab and Cheer. Like these are the companies that we look at as our competitors. These are the folks that we're competing for slots on Netflix and Hulu and HBO for.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So whereas like like someone like New York Times, when they're going to do like a TV show, they hook up with a production company in order to do the work. Whereas I kind of feel like in some ways it's almost like tech. Like, I mean, with Vox, Vox built its own, tech platform and infrastructure, both the monetization side and the distribution side, with Chorus and Concert.
That's right.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
In this way, you've decided like we're going to do the sort of the whole stack.
I think you nailed it because it was always going to be the way that we were going to do it because it's in our DNA to do that. And we learned really early on that at the end of the day, we could go out. And when I first moved out to LA and started having these conversations about how to bring our stuff to television, a lot of the common wisdom was you've got a partner. Like you've got to find a production company to work with. Like you mentioned, the New York Times, they work with a great, amazing production company called Left Right, who would also be in our competitive set to produce their FX and Hulu show. And so our agents, who were signed with WME, shout out WME, they were directing us to find production companies we could partner with and work our way up. And we started looking at it, and the big lesson we learned was, we kind of tried it once. We put a partnership together. We started developing a show, and we tried to take it out. We put all this energy and work into, working with this production partner to develop this show. And then we pitched it out, and we really quickly realized that, like, despite their best intentions, like, our show was one show of like 50 on their development slate. And that if we were going to be serious about this, then we needed to have a slate with 50 shows on it. We needed the infrastructure to develop modern TV and then produce it. And just like the you mentioned, kind of developing our own tech stack on the publishing side, that's essentially the same thing that we have in the studio. So we have all of the infrastructure, just like we do on the publishing side. We have all the infrastructure we need to develop a show, do the business deals, do the finance and accounting, physically produce it, do the post-production, do the finishing. And just like with Chorus, it creates not just a creative opportunity for us, because at the end of the day, like, we are delivering to the network. There's no middleman for us. We are the buck stops with us, which gives us an extra, piece of control of the creative, and that, like, we're directing where the money's going, and therefore have a chance to really make sure that our creative vision is achieved. And it's ultimately on us. There's no one else, responsible for it. And then it actually is a good business. So, the infrastructure of producing TV, while it carries a lot of upfront costs, like building out edit bays, putting in, monitors to do color correction, all of that, and then all the infrastructure you need to manage the kind of freelance armies that we put together when we make shows, we can make money on that as well. And so for us, the model was, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to build a business, not just, licensing and selling our IP and making our producer fees, but we're also going to build a business, taking advantage of the infrastructure that we built. And in many cases, we already had the infrastructure for making web video. And it was the big challenge was getting a network to agree to let us do it. Having never made a moment of TV.
Let's look at an example of that. Let's go to an example. I mean, which would be a good one? Would it be the Eater one, or?
I think, we could talk about Explained. Would be a great example. So, Explained is our show on Netflix. And that was one of the first shows that we pitched when we first sat down and said, we're going to go out to Hollywood, we're going to make TV. We developed
franchise. Vox was built around Vox.com was built around explainers.
Nobody in the world better at explaining things. Ezra Klein is an executive producer on that show. Ezra has a whole model in his head about how, what makes a good explanation. And we thought that might make for a really compelling show. And what was interesting is we had said from the very beginning that our dream home for that show would be a place like Netflix, because the idea of building a library of explainers that could be evergreen, and the whole, a lot of the Vox.com's mission was, how do you like take a news org and move it to a digital world where there is an archive. You don't have to print the paper every single day. You can update stories. And so we built Explained from the beginning to be an evergreen news show that was able to, like, last for a long time. It was sort of designed for the streaming world. And so we put that show together, and Vox had a lot of experience making explainers, even in video. And we pitched it to Netflix as a kind of new type of show that was a very premium, very sort of made for Netflix, evergreen explainer show that helped people to understand the world around them. And they took a experiment with us. I mean, they told us from the very beginning, like the first season, they ordered 20 episodes, which was a massive order, and a big bet on their part. And they said, look, we're going to try this. This is an experiment. We're you guys are unproven, but we like the ingredients here. And so they really, like, stepped up and made that bet. And it's been a huge success since then. We've now produced 2 seasons of the show. We're in our 3rd season now. We were just renewed for season 3. And one of the big kind of outcomes of the shutdown was, Netflix called us right after the lockdown started and said, hey, we're planning season 3 right now. We are getting ready to gear up. We think that the world would really benefit from, and our members would really benefit from, something around the coronavirus. And so we got a call from them, and then basically crashed on this mini series of Coronavirus Explained, as you're seeing on the screen. And we had to figure out, how do you make a show that normally takes, everything from, what it takes, weeks at a time, like up to 10 weeks to do an episode. and even longer to deliver it to Netflix. How do you do that in 2.5 weeks? And how do you do it on something, on a topic that's changing every single day? And so we put together a remote team. We put together remote editors. We were very
Let me just jump in here for a second, Todd. When did you begin planning the remote? Because we can get into now the
sure.
remote reality. I mean, this thing sort of, I don't know, like it kind of hit. It didn't hit suddenly, really, but I think a lot of us were in denial, maybe a little bit. When did you have your oh shit moment?
So I had my oh shit moment. We were in production on one of the other shows that we're producing is a show with David Chang and Chrissy Teigen for Hulu, which is part of the 3-year kind of multi-show output deal with Hulu. And we were getting ready to shoot our first episode. So we had a set built. We had a bunch of people showing up to shoot. And on that, we were watching the progression of the virus, and we were starting to think about, okay, well, maybe what will happen, and to your point, like it was just like all at once. I remember the day we were on set. It was the day that the NBA decided to cancel its season, and we heard the news of Tom Hanks, and getting confirmed with COVID.
Yeah.
And it was just like sitting there, like looking around at all this infrastructure we built, all this, the set, all these people, the craft service tables, and we're like, we can't, this is it. Like, this is going to change our lives forever going forward. And so that was the big moment for us. And that week we started shutting down. I think that Thursday our office was closed, and we had to start putting our shows on hold. And basically everything went dark for us as we tried to, first and foremost, it was the health and safety of our cast and crew. And so we stopped production. And then we had a bunch of shows that were in the field. We had on our other Hulu show, Eater's Guide to the World, we had a field crew like they were shooting in New Mexico at the time. And so we had to get them back as the shutdown was, starting. And we had to figure out, how do you plan for getting them tested if we needed it? What would happen if someone was exposed? And so yeah, like I think for most people, it happened all at once. And our biggest challenge was, okay, well, first off, we had built, this year our production had doubled. So we were planning on producing twice as many shows. We're over a dozen series that we were in plans to make this year for various networks, some recurring series, some new series. And so we had built our whole year around like this very delicate, intricate puzzle piece of calendars to make sure that everything was lined up to, deliver all at the right time, make sure that we had support and the right infrastructure. And then all at once, we had to take all those machines and stop them and figure out, what does a shutdown even look like? Because, some of these are big productions. We can't just like hit pause, and say stop. We have got to wind things down. We've got to
give me an example, like, so how of the adapting.
So
speedrun. We're looking at speedrun.
We're looking at speedrun. So, well, this is actually like what happened next. So first and foremost, we had to slow down, and we had to sort of put all of our existing productions on pause. And what we were able, some of the shows that we had were going into post. So the first thing we did was quickly establish a robust kind of industry proof, or whatever, kind of, I guess we would call like, Netflix or Hulu or HBO approved post system, where we could have the kind of security to continue editing remotely. So the first thing we did was sort of establish that system, set up our editors remotely, get them what they needed to securely edit this footage, which, obviously it's different from delivering to YouTube, like for our own channels, like we've got information security things that we have to do to protect the assets of the companies that we're working for. We put all that in play. And then
first, it's like you've got stuff already on the conveyor belt, and you got to make sure that this stuff gets to the end of the conveyor belt.
That's right. The stuff that we could. So if it had already been shot, we basically said, okay, we've got to take our post-production out of our, edit bays in our office and then move it to people's homes. And so that was the first big step of how do you do that securely and safely. The second thing we did was we were about to begin production on our show Speedrun, which is a Quibi show, a daily Quibi show about video gaming from Polygon. And we had a giant studio set built for that, like ready to go. It was about to start production. And in a week, we were able to basically move that show into the host Jimmy Mondel's living room. So you're seeing this is the studio set for Speedrun in Jimmy's living room. and that show didn't skip a beat. We launched on the launch day. We were ready to go, and Jimmy, is now the host and producer and lighting director, and he does his own, wardrobe and hair and makeup, and with the support of our team remotely. So our producers just get on Zoom, and it's much like this. This is how we're making shows, and we're recording, the whole thing remotely. And it was a quick adjustment, but because Quibi was like, the show must go on, and we were ready to go, and we were able to sort of pivot fast, and that got on the air just as it had been planned.
So when did you tore up the calendar, this intricate calendar, you tore it up, right? I mean, like, you're not an epidemiologist, but you're on Twitter enough that you're pretty much an epidemiologist at this point.
Aren't we all?
But it's pretty clear that, like, oh shit, this is not going to be coming back anytime soon. So how do you remake a calendar, or do you just like say, hey, you know what, we got to just like do it on the fly?
Well, basically, like, from the very beginning of the shutdown, we've been remaking the calendar over and over and over as the situation on the ground has changed, has shifted. So, I think we wanted to make sure that our initial shutdown, we were able to communicate to the teams and to our partners that, that we were going to shut down for a real period of time. So we had basically said, we're going to give this at least 2 months, because we don't expect this to change. We don't want to rush it back into, back. We want to really pause and let everybody, and build some real plans. So when we do resume, we're ready to go. And so we immediately started doing that, started planning what our sort of calendar would look like at the back half of the summer. And then for the shows that we could go and keep shooting or do remotely, like Speedrun or like Explained, we just immediately transitioned into figuring out what those shows could look like producing, remotely. And
so did you just chop off? Because I mean, Thomas McKenna, and also I should add, please do use the Q&A function. I want to make this interactive. We got a ton of questions that came in beforehand. But Thomas McKenna had asked, this is all about remote shooting. It seems like a lot of the kinds of content that Vox makes already is not to say that it's easy, but that it's easier than some other kinds of content. Did you just like look at your calendar and your plan and be like, okay, that some other time? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was a mutual decision with our network partners. I mean, we have some shows that are extremely field production heavy, and we have a big studio show that we were prepping, and so those, it was a mutual decision with our network partners to just push pause until things that the skies were a little clearer and we could decide sort of when we could safely resume. And then yes, like, I think one of the structural advantages that we have is we are a production company that exists inside of a news org. And news and journalism is at the core of Vox Media, and that's still in our DNA. And so we were able to turn on a dime for some of these shows, and just like we said, the show must go on. So Speedrun, perfect example of that. Another example is we developed another show with Quibi as the shutdown was happening. They let us know that they were looking for something about the coronavirus. Is it possible to do a daily show that is, here's the information, news and information that's happening around the crisis. And so we developed that show and had it on the air in I think it was in less than 4 weeks. I mean, it went from literally there was zero idea. We were just, having conversations with them about Speedrun. And 4 weeks later, we had a brand new show answered by Vox on the air on Quibi. So we did, everything from developing what the creative would be, doing all the deals with Quibi and our talent, and hiring a show team. There's over 50 people who are working on Answered right now for Quibi, and that is Vox's daily news show. And those are 50 people that had gotten hired in 4 weeks and put together and had a show on the air. And it was an amazing effort. You see here, Cleo, our host of that show, that is her studio set. So she lives in a very cool apartment, and we were
it's so much better than this.
I don't know about that, Brian. I think you've got good.
I'm a clown back there. This is not my home. I don't want everyone to know this. This is not where I actually live. Okay, so you got this up and going, and you got 50 people working on it who were not previously employees that you've never.
Well, Cleo was an employee, but
okay, yes.
And one of the things that we had to do in order to crash to get this ready was we were able to take some of the Vox digital video team and immediately moved them on. I mean, they basically started making episodes. We got the green light from Quibi like in like 24 hours. You know, we pitched Jeffrey on the idea on like a Saturday. It was like a phone call at 4 p.m. He said, let's go and do it. And so by Monday, the Vox Video team had moved, you know, some of the core team had sort of moved over and just started making episodes before we even had, you know, the deal done or anything really finalized. They just were like, we're going to get ahead of it. We're going to start making episodes. And so we had this amazing infrastructure and resource. And that while we were hiring the permanent show team, we were able to make episodes using the Vox YouTube team, the Vox digital video team. And there was a moment of sort of a handoff from that team as the staffers for the show team came on board. We were able to sort of transition it. And so Cleo was an employee and is still a full-time employee. She's the host of the series. But we were able to complement the existing team and build this team. And now they're off and running, you know, doing a daily show.
So I actually, a question just came in from Chantel Lucas, which is very pertinent to this. Outside of coronavirus content, are there any new show concepts that have originated from the constraints of remote shooting? As we all know, creativity thrives in constraints. Any remote shooting quirks / adjustments that the team is applying to future sets in person? Obviously, we're all wondering what happens on the other side of this. I mean, just let's hope we get to the other side of this.
Yeah.
But any examples that you have of new show concepts that, without all these unfortunate circumstances, maybe you wouldn't have had?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, you mentioned like for coronavirus news shows, I mean, that we were doing 2 productions that we were able to continue. So, you know, the Quibi show Answered and, you know, Coronavirus Explained, those were shows that, you know, those were ideas that didn't exist. And it is like they are, you know, about the crisis. So that might be, you know, a caveat. But for us, from a business standpoint, we were able to keep going. You know, even though we had a bunch of shows that had to get put on hold, we were able to keep our teams working to produce the show for Netflix, to produce the shows for Quibi. So that was a great opportunity. We have also, in the interim, there are new projects that have come up that we unfortunately can't announce yet, that will be coming by the end of the summer, that are new shows that are not directly tied to the crisis, but that are, you know, driven by the creativity needed to make something remotely, which, you know, for us means, you know, more animation, remote production, things like that. And so we'll hopefully be able to have some news about what that is, you know, here coming soon. But then even like our show Eater's Guide, which you're looking at here, you know, that show was out in the field, and we had to call everybody back, but we were basically, you know, finished shooting the season. And so we had to move it into a post-production, you know, world. And as I mentioned before, we had set up the remote production. But what was also really interesting, we had to sort of recontextualize the show, you know, because the show was about going out in the world to eat and finding these unbelievable places that, you know, that Peter knows so well, and the off the beaten path, and really these like quest-driven episodes.
It's not the time to go off the beaten path.
That's right. And we were all over the world, you know, and actually, you know, you asked a question about, you know, what was another moment, a no shit moment about this being real, is actually even before the shutdown hit America, we were planning on going to Singapore to shoot an episode of this show, and they had shut down travel. So that was a little early sign that things might be shifting pretty fast. But anyway, but even that show, it's like, you know, we had to go back and make sure that the restaurants that we'd featured, or the people that we featured, were still in business, or were still, you know, and how do you rewrite the creative now, knowing that something that had been shot before the crisis was going to be released after, or at least during, and how do you make it, you know, how does that not end up feeling tone deaf, because we were clearly producing in a different world. And I think the team has done a really great job, but there's been a lot of creative thinking about sort of how do you do a show like that? How do you, you know, both give people an escape, you know, through the culinary world, but then also how do you make sure that we're doing justice to the real stories?
Yeah, I know Tim Peterson has written about this sort of. I remember editing a story where I kept going back and forth with Tim, because like it was like people want counter programming to coronavirus, or not corona proof programming, which includes coronavirus. I'm like, I'm confused. And I think it's striking this balance where it can't be all corona all the time, but at the same time, nobody wants to be a tone deaf, whether they're advertisers or programmers. And you can't, you know, you see, I mean, when we watch TV, it's like, oh my God, why are these people standing so close to each other?
Oh yeah,
shaking hands.
yeah, exactly.
Wear your masks. One question that came in that I thought was interesting beforehand was, and you know, it's a broad question, but you know, maybe choose a non-obvious answer. But what is the most challenging aspect that you found of remote production that maybe people don't think of?
It's, I think that like everybody else, the remote work lifestyle, it's easy to work all the time. And in many ways, like some of the soft moments in an office of being able to like walk and go get some more water, or take a break, like you know a lot more people are eating lunch at their desks and working through the day. And so we're really trying to make sure that people take time and make space for themselves, because it's so easy to just get on a Zoom and work even more and even harder. And so I think the biggest challenge has been keeping the teams from working themselves too hard, knowing that how much we have to achieve and accomplish, together.
Well, that's a good thing, though, right? I mean, like like in some ways, I mean, it's a good problem to have because, like, you know, you want to be. So it sounds like you're saying like people are at capacity.
Correct.
I mean, the worst is if people were at 20% capacity and all the time in the world. That's a bigger problem.
Well, and not for us, because we really just, for every show or every production that had to stop, we've been able to replace it with something that we can do now. And that has meant that, we've been, and that oftentimes, like, we have, deals in Hollywood, they take a long time to close and they take a long time to sort of move
Yeah.
through. So you're able to build in a lot of time to get it on its feet. But in this case, we've had to go on a dime. So a lot of those things that would normally take sort of 2 to 3 months to set up, we've compressed to 2 to 3 weeks. And so, yeah, I mean, it's people are at 100% capacity. We're at 100% capacity, running as hot as we've ever run, and just trying to do that remotely where we can't, be together in person. I mean, an assistant editor and an editor and a producer can't sit in an edit bay and watch something together, and you can't walk around and see what other people are working on and get ideas. And so there's been a creative challenge, and then there's been I want to make sure that our teams are supported and that they don't
Yeah.
burn themselves out, because it's easy to do.
So, I mean, you're in Hollywood, and I don't know the Hollywood life exactly, but you know, look, there's a lot of I don't want to say schmoozing, but like, look, it's like you're doing meetings, and I got when I'm in like LA, I hear people just like they're on their fourth breakfast and stuff like this. And that's gone. I think maybe it's coming back now. And obviously, you're talking about being on a Zoom on a Saturday afternoon with Jeffrey Katzenberg instead of being at some, I don't know, some Beverly Hills hotel or something. Uh, I hear a lot that like things are moving quickly. Like, I mean, that like it's like no, 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 nothing, nothing. Okay, I need something in 2 weeks, whether that's ad deals or whether it's these kind of deals. How do you think that ends up normalizing on the other side of this? I mean, or do we snap back to the norm of how?
I mean, the schmoozing is, I mean, I love to schmooze as much as the next Hollywood person, I guess. But we've kept in touch, and there's been a number of producers we've been doing our Zoom happy hours and trying to
Okay.
stay in touch. I do think that the pace has definitely accelerated on a lot of this stuff in general, and you're right, it's happening on the ad side as well. One of the things that I think is interesting about what might stick around is, for the longest time, just the funny kind of Hollywood culture, right? Like, you could not get an agent or a lawyer, and in a lot of cases, like a network, to like join a video call. Like, it was impossible. Everybody loves their phones and to roll their calls and have their assistants out there like rolling calls in their, driving around Beverly Hills or wherever. And that has been a huge shift. All of a sudden, it's like I see all of our lawyers every week. Here they are, and then the networks and the agents are all on video conferences. And so, one of the interesting things that I think that has changed is, we have resumed pitching new shows now. So for the first month, I had sort of told our development team to focus on the coronavirus shows, like things that were COVID proof or COVID, about COVID directly, and get them on its feet. And then as things have sort of stabilized a little bit now, we've gone back to the development well, and we started pitching again. So pitching new shows, and we're pitching shows for I think we're calling it a COVID reality. So like, we have no guarantee that there will be a vaccine.
Mhm.
So we expect that, even if we're able to resume production, it will be with constraints in some kind.
But creatively, are you working that into the shows then?
Every single element of it, yeah. So
Give me an example. I know you probably won't tell me the exact shows, but give
well,
me an example.
I can't go into detail about the shows that we're pitching in per se, but we're trying to make sure that if we're out in the field, we're keeping it small. So like, if we're doing a show, like we had an idea for a show we were working on, and there was a beat in the show where some of the cast members would go out into New York City to find and source ingredients and put things together. And there was a whole beat around that. And the dynamics of what that did in the show and how it functioned was like a big part of the creative. And we decided that instead of doing that, like we can't, realistically expect that we could just send out a bunch of people running around the city. And so we've had to come up with a creative solution of sort of how do you keep that same creative beat, because it was important to the show, while doing it in a contained way. So we decided, let's just do it in a single space and have them go source, bring all that stuff in and have them go run around and source from, one location, basically, like a market type thing where we can clear it, we can make it safe. And we've thought a lot about like, well, one thing, like structurally, I think that unscripted shows and the majority of our production business is unscripted TV and documentary. Although now with Epic Magazine and New York Magazine, we're producing shows like Little America on Apple, which is a scripted series, which has been renewed for a second season. And the New York Mag team has a lot of great, we've got a lot of great, scripted projects coming out of New York Magazine. But the majority of our production business is doc and nonfiction. And the one benefit to that is that those shows we think can come back a little bit faster, because a lot of times our subjects are real people and they're out in the world. And to line up the calendar for us is a lot less complicated than lining up all the different cast members and the actors and the talent and the directors and everybody for a scripted project. So we think that one of the results of the pandemic will be that unscripted shows, there will be like another little wave, as we think we can get back into production. We can make things faster. We could deliver things faster than scripted, some of our scripted peers. And so we think that, so we're set up for that moment and we're pushing forward. And so a lot of the networks have said to us, they like the idea that, a documentary series, it doesn't require huge sets with a bunch of, hundreds of people on set. You can do it with small field teams. You can make sure that they're safe. You can test people, you can check. And so that has an advantage for us to get things sold and back on the air, much faster than maybe you'd be able to do on the scripted side.
So in addition to the Corona crisis, the economic crisis, we now have a third crisis. And obviously the killing of George Floyd has led to an outpouring of protests, of civil unrest, a lot of introspection about a lot of the systemic racism and injustice that has existed in this country for hundreds of years. Do you see this impacting exactly your approach to programming? Is there an appetite for this? We got a question ahead of time about whether Vox is adding any content educating the public to be better citizens, or do you see, I think this sort of introspection has entered into all sorts of industries and all sorts of different levels, as it should. Do you anticipate now like more shows being I don't really even know what the field, like the sector would be called, but in this kind of civic realm?
Well, let me just say that we unequivocally stand in support of our Black colleagues and neighbors in the fight for racial justice and racial equality, and stand by it unequivocally. The question of, what are we doing? It's like, we can always do more. I think that like, there's no excuse for not doing more. And for us at the studio, diversity, like both on and off the screen, has been very important for us, as it is for our buyers and our network partners. But the industry has a long way to go. I don't think there's any like need to mince words about that. And I think we can always do better. One of the things we feel really strongly about is that both on the digital publishing side and the magazine side, and just as importantly on our studio side, we have a big platform. Our shows are seen by tens of millions of people around the world, and we feel like we have a big responsibility to make sure that the creative that we're putting out is reflective of what our audiences are. And so we have the relationships and we have the resources to do more, and we will do more.
Are you developing programming specifically already in response that was either accelerated or caused by the last 3 weeks of protests?
Well, it's so the answer is yes, but it's obviously this is not a new problem, and we have been trying to do what we can to help tell these stories and to help elevate these issues across all of our shows. And so there were already projects in development that in the moment now are even more relevant and even more essential. And we've been able to and have had conversations with our network partners about content specifically designed to help elevate some of these extreme problems and prejudices and help to educate people. So the answer is yes to all of that.
But let's talk about New York media and the different brands here, because
Sure.
these are different from the, I don't, do I say legacy Vox Media brands? I don't know what to say. But these are different brands, and they have a different aperture. So that's got a lot of opportunity. You mentioned unscripted. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work now that you're doing with the integration of taking the New York brands and
Yeah,
bringing them along?
I mean, absolutely. So, New York is one of the best, obviously, most established voices and sort of media brands out there. We're so excited to have them on our team. And, they have a long track record in Hollywood of their shows or of their, features and franchises being adapted. Like Hustlers, a great example of a New York Mag story. They got turned into a huge movie. And there's, many others examples of that. One of the reasons why we were really excited about the merger was, they've been operating a lot like what we had talked about earlier, where they would predominantly, their business in Hollywood was licensing their IP to other producers who would then go and develop and sell and produce those shows. And by being able to, pair up with Vox Media and Vox Media Studios, like we are those producers now. And so we can take the best of New York Magazine and bring that to Hollywood and be the bridge and not just help them sell their IP, but actually physically produce and make the shows. And so, what within the first month of that merger getting completed, we set up a show at HBO based on a recurring cut series, Sex Diaries. And that is like something we're really excited about. And so, just even within, like I said, a month, we already saw an immediate impact, and the demand is absolutely there. And so, we've got projects working and going and either in production that haven't been announced or, in development that we're pitching now from all of the New York brands and working really closely with their editorial teams. And, in many ways, like that's a thing that I think also sets us apart as a studio in that like we have a long history of working with our editorial network. So we work with Vox Unexplained, we worked with Polygon on Speedrun, Vox Unanswered, Glad You Asked, Eater on No Passport Required and Eater's Guide to the World. And so we really understand at like a deep level, the way to try and help translate an editorial voice into a television show. And that's given us, a great footing to start with the New York Magazine team because, we don't have to learn how to work with editors. And for us, it's critically important that that the voice of the brand comes through. I mean, that's what's driving the interest in the show. So, we think like if we do our jobs well, everything that comes out of one of our editorial networks, we'll carry it forward and will feel like as much of part of the soul of that brand as if they'd made every frame of it themselves.
Right. So we got a lot of questions about live streaming and live streaming getting a boost because of coronavirus, and whether the momentum will continue once this is under control. I hope it's soon. But what are you seeing when it comes to live having a moment?
Well, aren't we in one right now?
Yeah.
Live streaming.
Yeah.
This is not maybe just me just putting on my industry hat now, like, and not so much talking about from a Vox Media perspective. There's not a lot of live programming that can be on air right now. Like, there's no live sports except for golf, which just came back yesterday. And I'm a big golf fan, so that was.
I'll jump in there. There's been table tennis out of Belarus.
And then I think the South Korean baseball, which is the Korean Baseball League.
Yeah, let's have it a moment.
It's having its moment. But, I think that people are hungry for things that are happening, together. I think there's one of the amazing benefits of live is there's a feeling of sort of community of seeing something happen together, and you can't really replace that, in something on demand. So, and I think that part of the other thing is it's relatively easy, as we are doing here, to set up a computer and go live and stream. And you're seeing like obviously Twitch is doing very well, and some of the other streaming platforms are doing very well. And I wonder what will happen once bigger productions can come back even in a limited capacity. I can't speak to the future of live, so much as I can speak to the sort of future of the business that we do, which is produce sort of premium
Yeah.
television, doc and unscripted.
Okay, so with production, okay, we went into this, remote phase. Now, part most of the country is starting to open up. I went to the shopping center around here in suburban Philadelphia. There's people sitting outside in the shopping center eating sushi in a shopping center. Wonderful.
There you go.
A sign of normal returning.
Remember that.
Um, what are you how are you planning for one, social distancing on set, and two, do you see moving production into, it's very clear there's going to be a belt of states that it has just like sort of like been like, it's fine, the cases will go up but we're going to stay open no matter what, and they are not closing back down.
Mhm.
There is a risk in some states of things closing back down. So are you going to like, are you packing up and moving to Alabama is what I'm trying to say, Chad.
Well, easy now. I'm from Georgia, so like
There you go. You'll
there you
be
go.
right next to it. Georgia, I don't know. They could shut down, but like in
It
all
could.
seriousness, there are states that are absolutely not going to shut down no matter what happens.
Yeah, no, and we are like very lucky to be a part of a company that has a very strong culture of taking care of our employees, and that's not just our full-time staff. That's all the employees who work on all of these shows, and we are very also fortunate to have extremely high quality partners on the network side that also put safety first. So there's no world or any reason for us to compromise on that in order to get something back on the air, even if it means it
Mhm.
impacts our business negatively. So we're going to make sure, and every single show, and that's one of the things we've been doing. So we've been looking at like when we can start production. I think LA, actually today is the first day that you can officially, according to the city, shoot again in Los Angeles with
Oh,
a
you
lot.
can.
Today was the first day. Yeah. And they put the plan out yesterday. So it was like, I don't know who's ready to go,
Okay.
but people are ready, and you can do it like, I guess, legally or whatever the city would approve the permit, the film permit.
Okay. But
Which is
you don't anticipate shooting less in California, say.
no, not at all, or New York, or wherever we do. No, we're not. And honestly, like we are going to be more conservative, I would imagine, than others, just because of the fact that we feel a deep responsibility to the safety of our casting crew. And so we're being a little bit more conservative, and we've got the full support of our network partners to do that. And every single show that we're bringing back, and like I said, there's like more than a dozen shows that we have to somehow all of a sudden go and push start on like basically on the same day, that's going to be its own whole challenge of like, we had built this really intricate calendar and how do you come back all at once. But every show has its own production plan that includes how we are going to keep people safe. And in many ways, like there is an additional cost to that. And that's a thing that we're willing to do in order to keep people safe in terms of providing PPE and having,
Mhm.
a COVID, essentially like a COVID kind of, it's almost like, I guess we're calling it like an inspector, somebody who's there to make sure that
You're going
everybody's
to be taking people's temperatures and stuff, or
yeah, everything like that.
when
Yeah.
do you anticipate to be like have like on set in person shooting going on?
I
Like
think
not just like someone going out on the street and like
yeah,
shooting.
no, we're planning on the end of the summer. I think that's like our general working plan. And I think some of the shows may go, it start in the fall a little bit later. Some of the bigger shows we might take a little bit more time. I think the biggest fear for us and the biggest risk, frankly, from a business perspective, is another shutdown. So we're taking the second wave extremely seriously. If it's very hard and very expensive to stop a production once it gets going. You can't just turn it off. You've got to provide people an off ramp, and so there is costs that you can't recoup. And so for us, the conservative approach is to try and mitigate having to stop down again. That would be catastrophic. If we rush back and we, just like everybody, if we rush back into it and we get into production again and then we have to stop again,
Mhm.
that would be, economically and
Yeah.
logistically extremely challenging.
Well, that's why I mean we were presented it more flippantly than it should have, but like that's why I was asking the question about there are clearly states.
Right.
Again, I've read Twitter enough, so I know epidemiology and how the politics of state governance work. That are not going to shut down again, no matter what. Second wave, third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave,
Right.
and there are states I think you're in one, and I normally live one in New York that will.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. And so for us, again, it's like, we aren't just we wouldn't do that anyway. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not our DNA. Like, it's more important to keep people safe than to just pretend that we're not in a unprecedented crisis with a lot of unknowns. And so that's why we're proceeding as conservatively and cautiously as possible.
Okay, so final thing is, I ask this of everyone with the new normal. Like, what sticks around? Like, what you've obviously done a lot of remote work, and you found that a lot of this stuff like works. Like, I mean, now I think we're in a period right now where people are a little bit um, forgiving of some of the sort of like rougher production edges as we see like Pierre's Gmail flip on the screen. Show don't tell, you know how it is, Chad. But that might go out the window. People, I don't know. What do you think sticks around, and what doesn't?
Well, I think I'm going to keep talking to our agents on a video conference, which will be really nice.
Okay. The lawyers are gonna be more on Zoom.
Saves me a drive to Beverly Hills to go see him, that's for sure. But no, I mean, one of the interesting things is actually like, now I think I didn't get to sort of finish this thought earlier, but like we started pitching again remotely, and Zoom pitches I actually think are here to stay. There is something about the focused attention you can get in a pitch when you're on a Zoom, and I don't know, it feels more democratized in some interesting ways. And so I think that in some respects, I would expect even if everything comes back to normal, I think the Zoom pitching will likely be here to stay. I can't imagine in the next year flying to New York to do a pitch. I mean, I used to fly to New York for lunch, like it's,
Yeah.
and I think that our clients at HBO, they're all based in New York, and I can't imagine pitching them anything by having to go see them. Like we would just do it over Zoom. And even in LA, like when we take a show out, you're driving all over town. You're going from Santa Monica back to Netflix in Hollywood, back to Santa Monica, down to Culver City. And I think that a little bit, to Burbank. And I think
then talking on the lawyers and their assistants on the way.
But honestly, like even just the logistics of that, like it's such a time sink to be driving around and stuck in traffic all day. And so I just think it's so much easier in some ways to just have everybody join. And now that behavior is so normalized, I can imagine that the remote pitching is going to be here to stay.
Well, what about on the production side? Are you going to continue doing remote editing and stuff? I mean,
that's a great question. I mean, I think that if you ask all of our editors, like they would prefer to be in an edit suite with their support teams. And there's this is at the end of the day, it's a creative industry, and creativity is really hard to do remotely, and especially when you're working so collaboratively. I mean, every Hollywood production is a collaboration, no matter what how big or how small it is, made by a team of people. And some of our shows are made by really large teams of creative people, very creative people, and craftspeople, and they like it. You benefit from being around people, and like it's as simple as like if I'm an editor and I'm in our office in one of our edit suites on an Explained episode, and I get up to walk into the break room, I'm walking past somebody cutting an Eater show or a Hulu show, and you meet people, you share ideas, you try stuff out, you say, hey, can you take a look at this cut? Like, what do you think it needs? And all that soft creativity, that comes from that kind of collaboration. It's just so pivotally a part of the filmmaking process, and that is gone. So I think people.
I have a counterpoint though. That sounds expensive. And you mentioned before, it's very cost effective to do this stuff remotely. You bring your costs down, and usually when costs are taken out, it's tough to bring them back in, right? And so Sean McNulty had a good question that actually has a great setup. Said Discovery is supposedly saving $300,000 an hour. My God, that's good, on programming costs with their new programming, and looking at what they can pay for some productions. Are you thinking or hearing that you'll get lower budgets from networks or streamers in the future? Everyone likes a deal. Everyone likes a discount.
Yeah. We've seen absolutely no sign of that. I think that one of the differences is, we are responsible stewards of these networks' money, and they are funding these shows. And the networks that we work with and the networks that, the shows that we make, they want the most premium quality. And for them, the incremental cost savings of something like that is not worth the hit to quality, and they have extremely high standards. And so I think that, you know, even some of our shows that are remotely produced right now, you know, the partners have, they're eager to get back into a studio and up the production value. I think like we're not worried about that eroding, because at the end of the day, like it's baked into the business model. You know, like the costs for production are baked into the business model, and just, you know, cost savings for the most part, it always comes off the screen. And that's the thing that I think is everyone's been willing to live with that for now. And I think audiences have been willing to live with it, but I don't think that's a permanent thing.
You don't think that lasts? Okay,
No,
so final thing before I let you go, because we're at the hour mark. Give me the 2-minute case for Quibi working.
they have a bunch of really smart people, and they are taking really big bets, and they are doing it in no different a way than any of the other networks that we work on. And they are trying to launch a new streaming service, which is difficult in the best of times. And the scale of what they've accomplished by being able to put all of that programming that did not exist 2 years ago from whole cloth, without being able to license libraries, without being able to pull in freebies because the turnstile technology, like they had to make every single minute of content that you see on Quibi had to be originated, had to be budgeted, had to be managed, had to be shot, had to be delivered. That is unbelievably impressive. And just like every other streaming network, like they will have a hit show that breaks out in culture, and the tide will turn. And they are in their early days. I think it is way early days for them. We are fully committed to them. We're very proud of the work we're doing there. They've been great partners to us, and I hope that we've been great partners to them. And like anything, you know, they'll have their breakout hit, and that's the case for me.
Okay, awesome, Chad. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.